today we're going to continue our conversation about price. And let's just briefly recap some of the things we talked about last time as it relates to price. We said that in order for us to set a price, to determine a price for our product or service, we have to understand our costs. Now remember, we said that our pricing objective is not always going to be profit, but in general, we talked about the profit equation, and we said that our total revenue minus our total cost is our profit. And so as business people and as marketers, it's reasonable to assume that we want to make a profit. We said there are some other pricing objectives that we might have. For example, besides profit, might be what? What might be some of our other pricing objectives? Market share might be a pricing objective. Social responsibility. Remember we said social responsibility could be our pricing objective, which means that our pricing objective might be to make our product available to low-income individuals, whether we're going to make a profit or not. So we gave that example about prescription medication. So our objective, our pricing objective for a particular, let's say, heart medication might be social responsibility. And instead of charging $150 for 1 month's supply of medication, we might charge only $15 a month. And he said, but wait a minute, Coach, we're not going to be able to make any money at $15? Right, but our objective in setting the price, because we could set the price at either $15 or $115 or $215. That's our responsibility, to set the price. But in that case, we decided that we would set the price at $15 because we're not trying to, what? Make a profit. That's not our objective. Our objective in this case is to do something socially responsible, which is to provide heart medication for low-income families or low-income individuals. We said our pricing objective might be sales. It could be dollar sales. It could be unit sales. What else? Anything else?
Let's say there's something to do with competition.
Well, we talked about competition in the context of market share. So, market share, what market share tells us, when we look at market share numbers, whether it's our share of dollar sales in the category or unit sales. So when we talk about unit sales, we're talking about the number of units of the product that are sold in that category. It's relative to competitors. That's why that was so insightful when we talked about how much orange juice our company was selling, and then compared that with how much orange juice was being sold in the entire category. Because remember we said in our example, we were selling 50,000 gallons of orange juice, and our competitors were selling 450,000 gallons. And so that means the total category is 500,000 gallons of orange juice in our example. That means that our market share is 10% relative to the competition. So yeah, that's a good point to clarify that one of the reasons that market share is so relevant and so helpful to us in managing a business is because it tells us how we're performing relative to other companies in the category. So those are some of the pricing objectives that we talked about. And we said that we need to understand our costs. We talked about cost classifications and cost behavior. You remember some of the cost classifications? We said that cost can be manufacturing costs, which we refer to as product costs, or they could be non-manufacturing costs, which we refer to as period costs. That's known as cost classification. So we're classifying our costs. Because we have a variety of costs. Then we said we need to understand cost behavior. What is cost behavior? Well, we said, for example, the costs that we already classified, those manufacturing costs or non-manufacturing costs, can be either fixed or variable. So if we say that the cost is fixed, we're talking about the behavior of that cost. The behavior of the cost means that if it's fixed, that the cost is not going to vary with the production volume. So in other words, when we produce more units, our costs, our fixed costs, are not going to change within a relevant range. So costs that are fixed don't change with the production volume. Does that make sense? We still need to capture those costs. We still need to measure them because they are going to impact the profitability of the organization. Very often, fixed costs are very substantial. Could be billions of dollars, some of our fixed costs. But we also want to understand our variable costs. Those costs that are going to vary with the production volume. So the more units that we produce, the greater our total variable costs. So we have total costs, but we also have, and total revenue. We said from our total revenue, we subtract our total cost, and that's our profit. But sometimes we talk about unit costs, right? The cost per unit. So we need to understand the quantity, because if we have the unit cost, I just want to make sure that everybody gets some. If we know what the unit costs are, right? So that's most likely what we're starting with is the unit cost, and we're trying to find out what the total cost is. So we have to multiply the unit cost by the quantity. So remember last time we talked about, for example, we said to make the product, it might require, let's say, plastic, right? We said, and the plastic is going to cost 50 cents per unit. So we need to multiply the 50 cents by the quantity to find out what the total cost is. So the more units that we produce, the more plastic that we're going to use. Understanding our cost is going to help us determine our price. So you can see why that's so important to understand our costs. And a lot of accounting, a lot of time in accounting is spent trying to understand what our costs are in our operation. Whether they're fixed or they're variable, we need to know what our costs are. And you know something? It's not that easy. When you're actually running, for example, a manufacturing operation, it's not so easy to understand what your costs are. Why? Because some of our costs are direct and some of our costs are indirect. Direct costs are costs that we could easily trace back to the product. Indirect costs are costs that are difficult to trace back. So you might say, what? Well, yeah, because think about a direct cost. We know how much plastic we're using. We know how much plastic we're buying. And we could easily trace that back to the manufacturing of 50,000 of these items that are made of plastic. But what about, for example, the plant manager? The plant manager, right? Let's say Chantel is the plant manager. And we pay Chantel $250,000 a year to manage the plant. Is that enough? No, it's not. It's not enough. But, oh, okay. Because Josh told me he would do it for 200,000, so now I got to decide. But okay. The question is though, how do we keep track of that cost? Because in a given manufacturing facility, we have items, we have product lines. What's a product line? A product line is a group of items, and we have a product mix, which is what? A group of product lines. So in other words, we're making more than one product in our manufacturing facility. So the question is, how do we allocate the cost of the plant manager? Because don't we need to take that into account? If we're going to determine what is our cost, it's not just the cost of the plastic to make the product and the little computer chips or screws or whatever it is that we use to make the product. We have other expenses. We have other costs, like the salary that we pay the plant manager. That would be an example of an indirect cost. Why is it indirect? Because it's difficult to trace that cost back to a specific product, to a specific item. So if we have a manufacturing facility that makes shampoo, and I know you guys always laugh because you say, what does this guy know about shampoo? Right? But you have shampoo that's for oily hair, for dry hair, for colored hair, right? So if you have, if you want to change the color of your hair from brown to blonde, right? So you use different shampoo because you don't want the shampoo to wash out the color. Is that right? So there's different types of shampoo. Shampoo for people with dandruff. Well, if you're making all those different items, and that's part of our product line, then we're going to need to assign cost to each one of those items in that product line. So what's the key takeaway? We need to classify our costs. We have to classify our costs, and our costs are either going to be manufacturing or non-manufacturing costs. So they're going to be either product costs or period costs. Those are some key classifications. I'm not even going to get into conversion costs and prime costs. Those are also types of classifications. And we talked about cost behavior. We need to understand how is the cost going to either change or not change. So we need to understand if it's fixed or variable. Why? Because we need to make a decision about the price. How are we going to decide on the price if we don't know what impact that price is going to have on our cost? So one of the good things about fixed costs is that, although they're very substantial often, is that no matter how many units you make within a relevant range, the cost doesn't change. Isn't that's good, right? Isn't that helpful to know that your property tax, which might be $500,000, is not going to change if you make 1 unit or 1 million units? Because in order for us to determine the price, we need to understand how our costs are going to change if we produce more units. And we need to understand at what point we're going to make a profit. What is the point of break even? So we need to understand what is the break-even volume. That's the point where total revenue equals total cost. Why do you think that's helpful? Break-even volume analysis is very important in our decision regarding price. So we need to determine what is the break-even point. At what point is total revenue going to equal total cost? So remember, we didn't even say we've made a profit yet. The break-even point is just the point at which, at a certain quantity and a certain price, the total revenue equals the total cost. Before we even go into production, we could do a break-even volume analysis. So it's going to help us make a decision with regard to how much we should charge. So we know beforehand whether or not it's going to be possible for us to achieve a 10% market share. Because let's say it's a brand extension. We want to extend our brand into a new category. Well, we have to ask ourselves, well, how likely is it that we're going to be successful? Would we be able to get even 1% market share, no less 10% in that given category? What about this? Did everybody get this? I just want to make sure that nobody misses out this time. Last time I got some complaints, everybody didn't get Snickers and Milky Way. Just want to make sure. So we need to have, information is power, but it's only power if put to use. So it's critical, as part of our discussion of price, to understand what our costs are. And we said that some markets are elastic, and some markets are inelastic, and some are what we refer to as unitary. When we're talking about price elasticity of demand, that means some markets are price sensitive. So remember, we're looking at our profit equation is total revenue minus total cost. So we need to know what's going to happen to our total revenue if we reduce the price. Now that means that we need to understand, we need to know whether or not the market in which we operate is price sensitive or not price sensitive. And a lot of consumer markets are price sensitive, right? A lot of, we talk about the sales that go on in Macy's. The reason why they have a sale, a one-day sale, literally like almost every day, right? Is that true? Why? Because they believe that at a lower price, demand is going to go up. So we looked at the demand curve. So what this says that at this price, this is the quantity, and when we lower the price, the quantity is going to go up. That's the demand curve. What are some of the pricing constraints? So we talked about the pricing objectives, we talked about costs, we talked about different types of costs and how costs behave. What are some pricing constraints? What are some of the things that are going to impact the price that we're going to charge?
Consumers' income?
Yes, the income of consumers. So if we're in a recession, that's going to impact our price. That's going to be a pricing constraint. So are we in a recession? Or not in a recession? That's going to be something that's going to impact the price that we charge for our product or service. What about the price that competitors charge for comparable products? That could have an impact, and in some cases, that's part of our pricing approach, which is that we charge a price that's either equal to our competitor's price or below or above what they charge. What about the price of other items in our product line? So the price of other items in our product line is going to affect the price that we could charge for this product. Do you see why that is? Because if you already established for one item a certain price, let's say $100 with certain features and certain benefits, now you come out with an item that, let's say, has less features, less benefits, a lower quality, then the two products side by side have got to have an appropriate perceived value. So that means that you can't charge more for an item that you're currently selling as part of your product line. So you see why that is? So you already have a product that's at $100. Now you come out with a version that has less features, less benefits, lower quality. You can't sell that for $125. We painted ourselves into a corner, so to speak. Right? That's a cliche. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Does that make sense? So in other words, when we have a product line, the items in the product line are priced relative to each other. So we have a product in a product line that's $9.99, and then the next item is $14.99, and then the next item is $19.99, and then the next item is $24.99, based on the value that's being offered. So why is each item $5 more? Well, maybe because each of those items have 5 more gigabytes of storage. So you want 5 more gigabytes of storage? Okay, that's $5 more. So you could buy one that has 10 gigabytes for $9.99. You want one with 15 gigabytes? That's $14.99. You want one with 20 gigabytes? That's $19.99. So that's going to be a constraint when we determine the price. The price of our items in the product line have got to be in relationship to the other items. And what I just described to you is actually a pricing approach. That idea of $9.99, $14.99, $19.99, the pricing approach is known as odd-even pricing. The belief is that consumers are going to perceive that $19.99 is less than $20. That $24.99 is less than $25. And it could be Walmart uses both odd and even pricing because they have products that are $8.47 and they have products that are $9.48, $8.78, $14.97. So it's that off pricing. So it's off the full dollar amount. We also refer to that as magic price points. So even in our own shopping experiences, you've probably seen quite a bit of pricing at those, for example, those price points that I mentioned. Those are considered to be magic price points at retail. And it's also known as a pricing approach described as odd-even pricing. What do you think? Does that impact your decision? If it's at $19.99, you think like subconsciously you're like it's less than $20. If it's $20, does it seem like a lot more than $19.99? What do you think? And then there's tax too, right? Some people said no, some people said yes. And I think, when we talk about it in this setting, also I think we're being rational. But when we're shopping, maybe we're a little bit irrational. And even if it's not consciously, but subconsciously, to us, it seems a little bit less expensive. And it is a little bit less expensive by like 1 penny. But research has shown that it impacts consumers' shopping. Another thing that impacts consumer shopping is rebates. Even though you're going to pay the full price when you go to the register, the availability of, let's say, a $200 rebate impacts the consumer's purchase. Because we all intend to send in the rebate, but very often, customers don't. Very often, they don't send it in. So it's an effective strategy to do that, because you know that in people's minds, they're purchasing based on that $200 lower price point, but very often, even for $200, it's common that people don't submit their rebate. What about the cost of marketing and marketing communications? Isn't that going to impact our price? That's one of the non-manufacturing costs, one of the period costs, right? That we talk about in managerial accounting. People are so obsessed, you know, they all keep talking about how much it costs. What is the FOB price of, let's say, a hoodie? What is the FOB price of a hoodie that P. Diddy is selling? You guys know who P. Diddy is? P. Diddy. Yeah. So, people are, who are making those remarks don't understand, like what we've been even talking about here today. No less, be a certified public accountant. Because they don't understand that that's just the price of the item. That's not the cost. That's just the price without shipping. So we need to know, what is the landed cost? What is the total cost? Because if you ship a product from China, you ship it in a 40-foot steel container. So all the items, these hoodies, they're boxed up in these cartons, and the cartons are all loaded into these 40-foot steel containers. You have to pay to rent those containers. And the price ranges from, depending on availability, $2,500 to approximately $5,000. That cost has got to be absorbed by the items. Now, $5,000, even at $5,000, you may think, man, does it really sound like a lot? But how many cartons are you able to fit in there? And how many hoodies are we actually shipping for $5,000? And then what about if we're shipping 50 containers? So it's misleading when people say, I don't understand how they're selling hoodies, right, for $100 when it only costs $5 to make it in China. Well, that's the price. That's the item cost, but you have to pay to ship it. You have to pay we have to pay Chantel, right, in headquarters, right? Because now that we decided to outsource, instead of firing her, right, like Donald Trump says, you're fired, right? We gave her a job in headquarters. We still have to pay her. We have to pay our accountants. We have to pay our marketing team. We have to pay for advertising. So we're running ads during the Super Bowl. So we have all these other costs, all these other expenses that need to be considered. That's going to be a constraint. That's going to impact the price that we charge the customer. So it's not just about the cost to produce the product. Yeah, we need to know what are the product costs. We need to know what are those manufacturing costs. But we also need to know what are the non-manufacturing costs. What are the period costs? Right? Those terms, we use them interchangeably. How much are we paying our advertising agency? How much are we paying the public relations firm? How much is it costing us to develop and implement promotions. All of those things we need to consider. That's going to impact our price. And what about the stage of the product life cycle? That's going to be another constraint. That's going to impact the price that we charge. Is the product new? So based on that, we could talk about some different pricing approaches, right? So for example, depending on the stage of the life cycle. So we have what? Demand-oriented approaches, cost-oriented, profit-oriented, and competition-oriented. So we mentioned a number of times some of the demand-oriented pricing approaches. So as we think about the price elasticity of demand, you're like, what does that have to do with anything? So, okay, I got it. It's a little interesting that there's some price sensitivity in the market, or there's not price sensitivity in the market. That's meaningful to us because that's going to help us decide what our pricing approach is going to be. So is it going to be a demand-oriented pricing approach? So, okay, we have our demand curve, and we understand the price elasticity of demand. And that being said, we're going to have to decide whether or not our pricing approach is going to be demand-oriented. So are these concepts, are these issues, is this information here going to determine our pricing approach? And specifically, is it going to result in us selecting a demand-oriented pricing approach? So one demand-oriented approach that we mentioned a couple of times this semester so far is penetration pricing. Penetration pricing is a demand-oriented pricing approach. Why is that? Because we said that if we believe that the market is price sensitive, then maybe we should implement a penetration pricing strategy, which means that we introduce the product at a low price so that we could penetrate the category, so that we could accelerate the rate of adoption, the rate that we move through the adoption curve model, by introducing the product at a low price. But there's some challenges associated with penetration pricing. What do you think one of the challenges is for us with penetration pricing? What do you think is an issue? So if we introduce it at a low price, then that means that we're going to have a very high level of demand. Assuming that we did our market research and we know that our product is going to meet an unmet need. At a low price, the demand might be greater than our production capacity. So that means that if our strategy, if our pricing approach is going to be a penetration pricing approach, we need to make sure that we could meet demand. And what that means is that we're going to have to invest a lot more in manufacturing equipment and production capability. Because if indeed we do see demand for 10 million units within the first 2 weeks of our launch, then either we have the product or we don't. But to make that kind of quantity, that means we would have had to have started making the product months before. Depending on the product, it could be a year before. So we have to do a lot of strategic planning. It's not that we just wake up one day and say, all right, this weekend we're gonna make the rollout quantity. These things have ideally been very carefully thought out beforehand and part of our marketing plan, and we set a price at which we expect to see a certain level of demand that ideally we can satisfy. So it's bad for us to introduce a product and then have stockouts at retail, which means that there's no product on the shelf. In some categories, it's considered to be somewhat acceptable in that it creates some level of hype around the product. But in most categories, we spend millions of dollars to get consumers to leave their homes, even walk out of marketing classes, to go to Target, Walmart, Best Buy, to get a product and then find out that it's not there. So what are they going to do? Keep checking back every day? Well, if it's a high involvement product, maybe they might, but most of the time, probably not. That means we're going to have to keep advertising and keep spending more money. So now there's another aspect that we need to consider. If we do have an investment in a significant amount of production capacity, we're taking a big risk. So you might think, well, we're going to sell a lot of units. You might sell a lot of units, but what happens if you don't sell a lot of units? What happens if the day before we're going to ship our product, or our product is available, our competitors leapfrog us and come out with something that's more innovative, that has more features and more benefits, and of course, at a lower price than us. So there's a risk to building this massive production capacity to support a penetration pricing strategy. That's the challenge of the American auto industry, is that in the 1970s, none of you were born then, in the 1970s, I wasn't born then either, so don't even. The big three, General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, they were the market share leaders. Toyota didn't have a significant foothold in the US car industry. So they were the market share leaders. They had this huge capacity to produce millions and millions of cars. And what happened? Competition came to the market, and each year they produced fewer and fewer cars, and that fixed cost had to be absorbed by fewer and fewer units. That means the cost per item, per car, is actually going up. And that's what put a stranglehold on the automotive industry in the United States. Is because their fixed cost, right? Here's an example where fixed cost is a bad thing, right? You have these huge fixed costs. Yes, I understand the costs are fixed. They don't vary with the production quantity. Well, that's great when your production quantity is increasing. But what about when your production quantity is decreasing? And your fixed costs don't change. And you produce 1 million less, and 2 million less, and 3 million less, 5 million less cars, and your fixed costs have not gone down. How could you be profitable? So, penetration pricing is an option, but for the reasons we just discussed, it may not be the best approach. Now, what would be an alternative? How can we address that? In today's economy, there is an alternative that could help us mitigate the risk associated with penetration pricing.
Pre-order?
Pre-order, yeah, actually pre-orders is a good way. If you do that far enough in advance, like for example in real estate, was it something I said? Okay.
Oh, no.
It's all right, I don't have feelings anyway, so don't worry. I don't, it's, you know, professors, they don't have blood. Well, they do, it's just that it's not red, it's green. But it is, I guess you could consider it still to be blood. You guys watch Vampire Diaries?
Yeah.
What? Woo! That's what's up. Yeah. Are they really coming out with a new Twilight?
Yeah.
Like, what is it, like Twilight 9 now? Twilight, you know, vampires?
Right.
Yeah.
That one was good. Much supernatural.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, Twilight is interesting. You gotta get into it. The first one is like really slow. You're like, yeah, but I don't know. Some people are really fans of that movie. Pre-sales are common, like for example in real estate, it's done very effectively. So before you spend $100 million to put up condos, well, why don't we try and sell a few, right? On spec. Sell one to Crystal, sell one to Nyala, sell one to Jesse, sell one to Steven, to Brandon, to Liza, right? Then, once we get the money of these suckers, I mean these investors, then we could start to build. Then we could start ordering cement and bricks and things like that. So definitely, that's a good approach. That's used effectively. In some categories, like what we've seen recently in electronics, it's not real. Because there's no way, when they say pre-order now, like in 2 weeks, there's no way they could make the product that's being demanded. It's just a way for them to allocate the product that they have. Because in that short period of time, it's not possible to create the millions of items that they would need. But what about outsourcing? So they say, you know something? You're right. I'm not going to tie up $50 billion in a manufacturing facility. Why don't I contract manufacture with another company? So another company already has manufacturing facilities. Why don't I make their product in their manufacturing facility? And then I'll wrap my brand around the product. That's very common in a variety of categories today. Not every category, but in a variety of different categories. And in some factories, they make products for competitors. And the only difference is, at the end of the assembly line, they put a different logo on it. And sometimes the quality is different. Sometimes it's the same. It depends on the factory. It depends on the requirement of the marketing organization. So that could be a way to reduce the risk associated with creating this enormous capacity. But I'll give you a little insight. Be cautious, because you know what some of these manufacturing organizations do? Is they oversell their capacity. So they understand, oh, I got it. I know, you guys, you're entrepreneurs, so you want to sell pots and pans, and Evan wants to sell pots and pans, so, and Mulan wants to sell pots and pans. So yeah, we'll take your order, we'll make pots and pans for you, and we'll make pots and pans for you and for you. The only problem is they don't have enough capacity to make pots and pans for all of those customers. So you need to have multiple sources. If you're going to use contract manufacturers, make sure that you have multiple suppliers. Because it's common that they will oversell. And you and your sales organization made a tremendous effort to get your product at Kmart, for example, and then what happens? You're all excited, you think the deal went through, and then the product doesn't show up from China. Which it normally takes 30 to 45 days. Something else to consider about when you're sourcing product. So if we're going to make the product ourselves or outsource it, it's going to take at least 30 days on a ship from China. What about skimming? Skimming, we introduce the product at a high price and then lower it in a planned way over time. That's not analogous with penetration pricing. Sometimes I have students who say, well, penetration pricing is you start at a low price and then raise the price over time. And skimming is you start at a high price and then lower the price over time. No, that's, that's not true. Skimming, you start at a high price to sell to those innovators that might be only 3% of the category. And then you lower the price in a planned way over time because we believe the market is elastic and it is price sensitive, and that as we lower the price, demand is going to increase. That's different from penetration pricing. Penetration pricing is you introduce it at a low price, that's it. You can't raise the price after that. That would be very unusual to introduce the product at a low price and then raise it. How many of you want to buy a product today and then the next time you go to buy the product, like let's say orange juice, right? Mulan. You go today to buy orange juice for $2.50. And then next week, it's $3.50. And you're like, well, that's penetration pricing. No, that's not penetration pricing. You introduce the product at a low price, and then it's going to be very difficult to raise the price after that. Why? Because the perceived value is $2.50. That's one of the challenges in implementing promotions. We have promotions. We have these 50% off sales. We lower the price, even though we call them TPRs, temporary price reductions. The fact of the matter is we lower the price. And then next week you expect them to pay $1 more or $2 more. We've again painted ourselves into that proverbial corner. How could you expect customers to pay more? So when we lower the price with a promotion, we may have outwitted ourselves. Because we lower the price because we want to increase demand. But we just want to increase demand and maybe to try and get trial, to get those light users to use more of our product. Or maybe even get some of the non-adopters. Maybe at a lower price, they'll buy the product, they'll try the product, and then we're hoping that there'll be repeat purchase. So price-oriented promotions are not always the best. It would be better, instead of lowering the price, to increase the perceived value. So give 5 more ounces of shampoo at the same price. So now the perceived value is, yeah, the price is still $7.99, but now I get 5 ounces, a 5-ounce bonus for free. So the perceived value has increased, and we're going to sell more, but we didn't lower the price. The price is still $7.99. Or even buy one, get one free. Right? We didn't lower the price. We didn't say it's $4 now, even though basically that's what it is. But we're increasing the perceived value to the customer. But often, it's going to be in our best interest to give more of the product for free.
What about giving less of the product at the same price?
Less of the product at the same price. So that means that we've raised the price then. So that's a price increase.
Isn't that very common in food?
Well, I mean, are you asking me, do I recommend that, or does it happen? Yeah, it happens. So instead of raising the price, some organizations, they realize that the market is price sensitive, that if you raise it from $7.99 to $8.25, that people might buy less. So what Josh is saying is, well, we'll keep the price the same, but we'll give like one less cookie in the Lunchables, right? One less Oreo. Nobody will notice. I'll notice. But yeah, that happens. Yeah, absolutely. What about, let's see, we talked about, let's see what we missed here. We talked about odd-even pricing. We talked a little bit about prestige pricing, which is that a product is desirable because at a high price, we've established a level of prestige. So it's priced because at a higher level, because we recognize that one of the motivations for buying the product is that it's going to provide a certain level of prestige, or it's going to boost our self-esteem. Very common with luxury items, we said. All right, cost-oriented pricing. We talked, well, we didn't talk about this yet, actually, about markup, standard markup. So what it says is that based on what it costs us, let's say if we're a retailer, based on what it costs us, we have a standard markup, which varies from category to category. So in some categories, the standard markup is like 10%. Like in groceries, for example. In groceries, the markup is very low. Sometimes it's only like 8%, 9%. In other categories, like for example in home furnishings, you know, like we talk about these pots and pans and so forth, the markup is 30% and 50%, which isn't even a lot because in clothing, very often in apparel, the markup is 100% and 200%. So in terms of determining our price, we're looking at the cost and then we're marking it up. It's called standard markup. We're going to mark it up a certain fixed percentage. In some cases, we're focusing on profit, which means that we set the price based on a certain level of profit that we're trying to achieve. And in other cases, it's based on what the competition is charging. So our pricing approach is defined by the price in the marketplace for comparable products. And we could set our price either equal to, above, or below what the market is currently charging for that product. Now let's talk about, oh, did we talk about, one other thing about competition. Besides above, below, is the concept in competition-oriented pricing known as loss leader pricing. So a loss leader is when we sell the product at a very low price, so we could drive foot traffic, for example, into our store. Let's see how much time we have. Oh, we got 2 more. Oh, we still got like 2 more hours. Okay. I got it. So that's a loss leader. Forget about making a profit. It's not about making a profit. It's like, for example, orange juice is very often a loss leader. Because orange juice is not $2.50 half a gallon. But very often it's promoted at that price because people know that Tropicana, a half gallon of Tropicana orange juice is $4. And so when you see it promoted at Pathmark or Publix or Key Food or Wallbounds for $2.50, it's a loss leader. Because people know that the price is $4. and when they see it at $2.50, they go there to buy it. Our expectation as a retailer is that they're going to buy other items as well. So we're trying to drive foot traffic to our store, and a loss leader is a way to do that. So by selling it at a very low price, we're getting people into our store with the expectation is that they're going to buy other things that aren't on sale. All right, let's talk about break-even. Because we need to know at what level we're going to break even. Remember, at break-even, total revenue equals total cost. So we're going to set our price at a level, presumably, right, that is going to be enabling us to achieve sales, or a volume rather, that is below the break-even point. Because at that point, we're making a profit. So the break-even point, the way that we calculate that is we take the fixed cost and we divide that by the price per unit after we subtract the unit variable cost. All right, it's not complicated. What we're trying to find out here is the break-even point. How many units do we have to sell to break even? This is extremely important to us as marketers in determining the price. We need to know whether or not we could achieve that break-even point. So again, before we even go into manufacturing and we're sourcing and we're spending $50 billion to build manufacturing facilities and distribution centers, we need to know, can we sell each year that volume? At least this volume, which is the break-even point. So there's actually an example in the book that says that our fixed cost, I think it was for photo frames, says that our fixed cost is $32,000. So our fixed costs are $32,000. Those are the costs that are not going to vary with our production volume. It's our real estate tax, it's our premium for insurance. All of those are examples of fixed costs. And then from that, it says that these picture frames we sell for $120. So it's a very nice picture frame. $120 for a picture frame. That's the price that we sell the picture frame for. But we have some costs, some variable costs. It tells us that our variable costs are $40. Our variable costs are $40. So each picture frame that we make has variable costs. It's for the crystal, it's for the felt, the cardboard, whatever it is that we need to make the product. So what happens? So we have 120 minus 40 is $80. So our fixed costs are $32,000. Divided by $80 is what? 400 picture frames. That's our break-even point. That's the point where total revenue equals total cost. Well, actually, it's the point Yes, total revenue equals total cost, and if that's the case, then our profit is 0, right? So we said that total revenue minus total cost is our profit. Well, if these two are the same, that means our profit is 0. Very important. We need to know, is 400 realistic? Can we at least break even? Now we know that when we're setting our price, it has to be at a price that at a minimum will allow us to sell 400 units. So this is going to help us decide what price we should charge. Does it make sense? Do you see why that is? This tells us that we're going to break even. Our total revenue and our total cost will be the same. Our profits will be 0 if we achieve sales of 400 units. We sell 400 picture frames. So we could go through this analysis. We could keep changing the price. Remember, this we do early on in the process. This is not like when we're ready to launch, we decide, all right, let's do a break-even volume. We could do this as early as the opportunity identification stage of new product development. So even in stage 1, we have to be thinking, how many coffee makers do we need to sell to break even? Now, in the United States, approximately 20 million coffee makers are sold each year. So if we do this break-even analysis and we find out that our break-even volume is 25 million coffee makers, what does that tell us? Find a different brand extension opportunity. Because if we need to sell 25 million coffee makers to break even, and the whole category in the United States is only 20 million, that tells us we're barking up the wrong tree. Right? We're barking up the wrong tree. How is that going to work? Unless we're assuming that the category is going to continue to grow. So very important for us, this is going to be very helpful in us deciding what price we're going to charge. Because we're going to go through this analysis and we're going to try to anticipate, well, what happens if the price was $110? What if the price was $100? What would our total revenue be then? Remember last time we said, well, at a low price, we're going to sell more units, but maybe if it's an inelastic market, we'll lower the price 10%, but demand might only increase 2%. Then the lower price is not going to result in a demand high enough that will increase total revenue. So in elastic markets, we lower the price because we believe that at a lower price, if we lower the price 10%, that demand is going to increase by 20%. And therefore, even at a lower price, we're going to sell more units at a lower price, and our total revenue is going to be higher. Are we good? Are we great? Wow, you guys are awesome. You ready to bounce? All right, so see you next time. Do good things.